But we're seeing of late in certain circles, the most famous one being Tim Cook at Apple, came through the supply chain route and is now CEO. So I think there are advantages for bringing supply chain more to the fore in an organization and leveraging, the capabilities of your supply chain to either grow your revenue or improve your service to customers.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Chain Reaction podcast. As always, we talk about everything logistics. And today I have a very experienced supply chain leader, Rob Field. He focuses his career on excellence in supply chain on various dimensions. But the first question, as always, I'd like to ask people is, Rob, that's not necessarily the training that you've received. So was that the by accident or by choice that you got into supply chain in particular?
It was by choice. In the early part of my career, I worked for Centrica PLC in their British Gas Services division. I spent 14 years at the company, and the first 7 of those years I worked in the back office in the planning function. And then the second half of my time at Centrica was in the supply chain division. So it was by choice. I had the opportunity to move departments into an area that was getting a lot of focus, where there was a lot of change. My father has a background in freight handling, so I don't know whether that was influenced or influenced me in some way or not. But my move into supply chain was a chosen one.
It's very interesting, because I think you are in the minority among my guests. So majority of people, including myself, that I've ever spoken with, it was an accident. I think to an outsider, very often supply chain looks like something dull, something not interesting, and it takes a certain kind of a mindset and a character to actually kind of, when you start peeling an onion, you actually see exactly how much complexity and how much difficulty that is, and then brings a mental challenge, and many people enjoy that. And it looked like we had a discussion, and it looks like you enjoy an intellectual challenge, you enjoy addressing complexity. A lot of your work has been centered around a kind of performance improvement, turnarounds, that kind of work. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, back in my early days, when I joined supply chain at Centrica, they were going through a pretty wholesale large change insofar as they had regional inventories in every town. They had a gas depot in every town, and I worked for some really key mentors who decided to close all those facilities down and move all their inventory to one central warehouse location. So back around 2000, this was quite a revolutionary thing. You'll see now when you go up and down the M1 motorway, you'll see lots of large warehouse facilities. Back in late 90s, early noughties, British Gas was at the forefront of that. I was passionate to join that department and be involved in that. So a lot of work around closing existing infrastructure down, deciding on a new site, building a new national parts centre, and then looking at the whole strategic orientation of the supply chain for that division of the business. And that involved bringing all that regional inventory together, putting it all in one place, and then designing a distribution solution to, very much improve the way we delivered spare parts to mobile gas service engineers who were at the time working from home on a laptop in a vehicle. I was keen to get involved in that project, and it was a good grounding for me in supply chain as a young guy.
Well, this is very interesting because it's a very different kind of not take, but it's a different operational setup compared to, I don't know, traditional just outbound deliveries of I don't know, goods, whether it's B2C or B2B. The supply to service engineers or delivery of products, which also requires service element and kind of an organizing these sort of multi-stream logistics setup is actually quite interesting. So your Centrica experience, I've been a customer of Centrica for years, and actually I had quite a few conversations with engineers when they run out of spare parts. But also your recent experience with GLA, the work that you've done there. So can you talk a little about that, and specifically about the complexity of running the supply chains that involves that service delivery element?
Yeah, I think it stems from the types of business that you are there to help. I mean, you usually in most wholesale businesses you are servicing one type of customer. In a supply chain like Centrica or at JLA, you often have customer duality or even triality. We have at JLA, for example, you have customers who were contract customers who were often in a 10-year agreement with a defined service level, which you had to meet in terms of repairing their equipment. You often had people who were just wholesale clients who wanted to just buy the equipment. So they were just buying the product from you and taking delivery of it. And sometimes you had customers that would then come back for, say, for example, spare parts. So I think, in my kind of career, I've often spent time in supply chains where there are internal customers and external customers. Internal customers being engineers. So you have a service level that you have to meet to them for them to do their job well. And also external customers who can be contractual customers who are often in a 10-year agreement, or even just customers that want to buy something on a one-off basis.
Well, it's the integrating field engineers into kind of the centralized operations is as we know, is notoriously difficult. And about one of the elements there is not just the people, but it's also kind of it's the inventory they carry to maximize the probability of a one visit service, and that requires quite a lot of not just thinking and planning, but also tech side of things. So can you maybe speak a little bit of your experience of what are your approaches to address that or to solve those things?
Same day service, first fix are imprinted in the front of my brain. I mean, that is an area of life for me that has just been something I've been heavily involved with for a number of years now. So I think systems, van stocks, and the ease of use of those systems and the repeatability of those systems are so key when you have a service element to a product that you sell. There is no point having a replenishment system for engineers if they don't adopt it and they don't own it and they don't enjoy using it. So the usability aspect of a system where you have internal customers like mobile engineers is very key. Obviously, you are in service industries trying to maximize the uptime of a client's equipment. So the availability of spare parts and the speed that you get spare parts to those engineers is critically important. So I've always focused on, the systems that we operate, how easy are they to use? Inventory management has been a big focus of mine, having the right inventory on hand so that you meet the demand of either the internal customer, the engineer, or the external customer who simply wants to buy a product. But yeah, they're the key things I focus on. Working backwards from the customer has always been a key facet of what I've looked at in the past. Data is key in all of that. So, depending on the state of data when you arrive at an organization, can either give you good indications of where you need to head next in terms of your overall plan to improve things. But with data comes challenges, as you well know. Some data is not very good. Some data needs lots of cleansing. You sometimes have have to build in an element of rigor to data so that you move forward in a positive way rather than going backwards.
Yeah, I know it's a very often the problem is garbage in, garbage out in terms of data, and I know firsthand how systems can help or hinder the processes. But in your experience, and that was a question I was wondering about when you were describing it, is that more of a tech problem or is it more of a people problem, or is the combination of the two?
I think a combination of the two. The example I would talk about is at JLA. When I joined, we had 550 customers waiting for spare parts, and they were of varying ages. Some were waiting a few days, some were waiting a number of weeks. I spent what was initially going to be about 30 days looking at data to begin with, but that ended up being a 3-month project because the data simply wasn't clean enough and it wasn't telling us the right things. We quickly worked out that in a 17,500 SKU warehouse, we only needed half that number of SKUs to satisfy 98% of the demand. So clearly, in that instance, we had a huge amount of obsolete stock, and we had warehouses that were in disarray that needed cleansing. And so you set out on that journey of cleaning data, analyzing data, going back over that analysis to make sure you're making the right inventory decisions. The culmination of that was that I needed to spend about 300K on new stock that we didn't have, that was almost suffocating the demand of the customers that were waiting. Conversely, when you look at the overall stock position, we had 1.8 million pounds worth of stock, which was the right stock, but there was too much of it. So, we had lots of challenges in inventory demand and trying to work out what the best approach to that demand was. When we hit the button on the what was then called a crisis order for that stock, we started to simultaneously clean the warehouses and make things a lot better in terms of accessing warehouses, making sure bin locations were clean and tidy, and getting that warehouse space in the position that it could receive in this new stock. And then we start to see the customers or the customer numbers who are waiting for spare parts drop down over the next 6 months. So I remember after 6 months, we got the customer number down to around half, 260 customers waiting. And people in the office were almost doing cartwheels in the office. They thought it was a revelation. When I left the business in 2020, we were down to about 40 customers waiting for spare parts at any one moment. So a huge transformation just by focusing on the stock element and the demand element and data.
Oh, it's fascinating. Well, I relate with from my management consulting experience. I'm also relating to kind of your project, kind of the project based approach that you and the work that you do around kind of restructuring, reorganizations, improvements, and redesign. So it's interesting as a kind of when you come in from kind of from outside in, and you try to, let's call it, repair a broken system and make it a high performance one. Can you just maybe talk through kind of steps? Where do you begin? What are you looking for? What are the most immediate and impactful actions that you can take?
Well, there are no revelations here. It's a very straightforward approach. My first port of call is to sit down with every person within the team. I think a leader's job in supply chain is to decipher the truth, to try and understand what exactly is at the root cause of some of the challenges that the supply chain faces. And I'm a great believer that, if you get 10 of the right people in the room, you will come up with the right answers for a lot of the challenges. So my first port of call is to sit down and talk to all the key people. At JLA, for example, I had a team of about 40 people when I joined. The first couple of weeks was sitting down with all of those people, from people in the warehouse, inventory management, procurement people, even truck drivers, maintenance and repair technicians, and of course my peers within the business. Sitting down with them, it's then the job of a leader to understand, where the truth lies. Combine that exercise with what data is telling you. And then in the quiet moments at the end of the day, you start to decipher and understand and unpick some of the things that might be wrong and where you might need to focus your attention.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Well, I mean, it sounds trivial when you've done it multiple times. It's just very often for people that are kind of, I wouldn't say have the blinkers on, but it's like they're firefighting on a daily basis. And sometimes they just don't have the space to get the head up and have a look at it, and basically smell the roses and have a look at it holistically. So, interesting from your experience, what would you say would be the most popular causes of supply chain problems?
Oh, popular. Well, there can be many. We had inbound supply problems from America. We were in contractual agreements with some of the major laundry and catering equipment suppliers globally. And so many of the inventory challenges that we face were born of inbound, what I call upstream supply chain problems. You get an example where you look at those 550 customers that are waiting for spare parts, and you start to apply the 80-20 rule to understand where those challenges reside. And then you start to clear your mind on where the focus needs to be. In my case, in the example at JLA, we had many upstream supply chain problems with products that were not coming into stock in a consistent way. We had many single source challenges where we could only buy that product from one supplier, and that supplier was quite poor. We had instances where we didn't have full shipments, and of course, back order recovery time, what I call back order recovery time, was quite difficult to nail down. There can be many. I mean, conversely, Michael, you can have internal transactional problems within your supply chain, or you might have what I call downstream distribution problems, where you struggle to get the product to the right place in the right manner, in the right fashion.
It's interesting the way that you described this. I was thinking about if I split the problems into, let's say, structural versus kind of operational, or into is that a challenges that coming from organizational design and the way that the whole organization is working, or it's the process problem, so people don't know what's going on, don't know what to do, don't have visibility, or making wrong decisions at the wrong decisions at the right time, or right decisions but at the wrong time, or is that some kind of a little bit of external problem? I don't know, supply chain disruptions or incorrect setups with the suppliers, to what you referred to, where just suppliers are not complying with the requirements that's been either given to them, or the requirements that were given to them do not allow for kind of the right deliveries and right quantities and so forth. So these are which ones are the easiest fixes and which ones are more challenging? I'm trying to get to some of the kind of the fundamentals. Very often, the businesses tend to address kind of low-hanging fruits, the easiest ones, but it's not necessarily solving the underlying problem. And those challenges either reoccur, or everybody's putting too much effort into some superficial things, and the fundamental kind of the root causes not being addressed. So how would you go about this, and how often do you encounter these kind of things?
Quite often. I mean, demand and inventory is a key focus. For me, I mean, take the JLA example. We had a very complicated stocking policy, which not a lot of people understood. When I sat and talked to a lot of the people within the supply chain, and even our operational colleagues, not a lot of people understood this very complicated 9-stage inventory profile, and I love simple. So we completely changed that to a 3-stage inventory management process where category 1 products were products that we had lots of stock of, plenty of safety stock. We never ran out of those products, and they were a big chunk of our demand. Category 2 products were always given a min-max setting in the MRP system, and they were managed very acutely by a couple of very key procurement people and inventory management people. And then category 3 products were products that were bought on demand. We didn't stock those products. They were just on a lead time and we bought them. Switching the team's focus to that level of acute focused everybody's mind on some of the key things that we needed to be really good at. The other challenge that we had at JLA, because and this was a cause for why the warehouses were so overstocked, they were unsafe, they were over bloated with stock, was that we would have a representative from the US supplier who would ring us up at the end of the month and say, if you buy 40 grand's worth of extra kit this month, we will give you an extra 5% discount. And of course, we already had years of that stock, yet the legacy buying practices meant that we would just buy that stock and keep buying it when we didn't really need it. And of course, there was little attention paid to the chaos that was causing within the warehouse environment, because then the warehouse guys had to get really creative in trying to find a place for all this stock, So
that nobody needs.
So we switched the whole approach to inventory management to being a demand-led inventory approach rather than being an ad hoc one where we would buy any number of products in any number of quantities for actually not very sensible reasons.
Me coming from a kind of the software and the technology side of things, I'm interested on your views on, if I phrase it simply, can the tech, emerging, evolving, AI, all of that, can the tech solve a lot of these problems you're talking about?
I think it can, but I'm always wary of AI and certain examples of tech. I think good supply chain leaders will test that theory out. They will always not dive headlong into new tech and trust it. I certainly don't. I'm a Yorkshireman. I'm mistrusting by origin, and I'm always very cost conscious. So whilst I see the advantages of certain areas of tech in supply chain, I think you have to overlay it with some sensible thought and consideration, and just not dive into some of these things. For example, at JLA, we were embarking on implementing a new MRP system, a system called IFS. This was a fundamental shift from how the business managed its inventory to how it would manage its inventory in future. And, you could allow that system to run certain rules and place automatic purchase orders when, you really had to be careful and look at what that system was doing to make sure it wasn't, making the wrong decisions in terms of inventory. Because, if you let AI or automation on a too long a leash, it can impact you quite heavily in terms of stock and, how you buy products. And that was never far from my mind when implementing new software. It has to work in the right way for the business and how it trades and transacts. Mike, I'm not sure if that's answered your question, but yeah.
It does. It does 100%. I too clearly see that any implementation of tech for tech's sake, in the hope that no fundamentals from an organization point of view been addressed, and the tech all of a sudden, like a panacea, will be brought in and it will solve everything. Well, that's a very, very naive way of looking at things.
Yeah, the way I look at it is there's a theory in AI at the moment which is around this idea that AI needs to be a co-intelligence rather than an absolute intelligence. And I think that the way supply chain leaders will win with AI is that they use it alongside human brains and human, processes and how you transact a business, rather than letting it do everything. I mean, I'm sure there are things that it will do that will speed up things within supply chain. A lot of the menial tasks around placing purchase orders or deciphering inventory challenges. But I think using AI and tech alongside experienced people is probably the best way forward for it.
Well, you touched upon the supply chain leadership, and there's definitely is a very interesting area that I'd like to explore with you is on the what is the good supply chain leadership structure looks like. There is a role, and many talk about it for having a chief supply chain officer. What is a good leadership setup look like in your experience?
Well, I have a very simple theory on leadership. Leadership, to me, is quite simple. It's really about treating people honestly and fairly. It's about having a sensible vision. And usually, if you treat people fairly and you have a sensible vision for your department or your organization, usually people will come along on that journey with you. I think being honest and addressing challenges and socializing those challenges with a group of people is key. For example, at JLA, after about a month and a half of speaking to all the team and looking at data, I drew all the team together in the boardroom and talked to them about the way forward with the supply chain. And usually, if that vision is sensible, you will see people nodding and nudging themselves around the room to say, this is clear, this is where we are heading and what we're going to do. I think having a clear strategic plan for how you will improve a supply chain is very important, and how you communicate that is very important. And I have this theory about what I call keeping score. You must always revisit the communication element with people to explain to them where you are up to with that plan. And over time, what you should see if you get that plan right is a reduction in the noise within the business, where the supply chain perhaps isn't supporting the operating model of the business. And that's your barometer of success. It's understanding which metrics and which key performance indicators are the ones that you need to keep an eye on, and how the actions within your plan are then playing out in terms of real world benefits for the organization.
Well, one of the bits you mentioned is the simplification of supply chain operations and simplification of the management structures. On the other hand, an introduction of a supply chain officer or chief supply chain officer may imply increased level of complexity. How do you balance? How do you find the right trade-offs in this?
I'm going to get on my soapbox a bit here. My view is if a business doesn't have a chief supply chain officer at the boardroom table, then it probably has an underperforming supply chain or an underutilized supply chain. Most businesses have supply chain managers. They have head of supply chain. I just see no reason why you shouldn't have a chief supply chain officer at the boardroom table. You have a CIO, a CEO, a CCO, a COO. We can all understand all those acronyms, but rarely do you see a business have a chief supply chain officer. But we're seeing of late in certain circles, the most famous one being Tim Cook at Apple, came through the supply chain route and is now CEO. So I think there are advantages for bringing supply chain more to the fore in an organization and leveraging, the capabilities of your supply chain to either grow your revenue or improve your service to customers.
That's a very interesting thought, and I completely agree with you. And it's like I will join you on that soapbox to talk about this, because absolutely, supply chains for many businesses can make or break the business. In conclusion, I like asking that question to all my guests. We touched upon a kind of variety of issues that you help companies to deal with. But if you had, and there's a various sources and root causes for those, but if you had a magic wand, and if you can solve one thing but instantaneously with no extra effort of any kind, what would that be?
Oh wow, it's a tough question. I think. I still don't think we've cracked visibility of products within the supply chain. You will see it in your everyday life. You order a product, you look on the order that you get from your supplier or the company you've visited to buy a product. They often send you a tracking notification. You see the advances in Uber and Uber Eats, and being able to see your taxi driver that's taking you out for a meal that evening. You can track his whereabouts, and you can track the exact time where he's going to be and when he arrives at your home. I still don't think we've achieved that in supply chain yet. Yes, we've had some advancements in RFID scanning and knowing where products are at certain points of the journey, but I still think the one we really need to crack is knowing exactly where a product is at any given moment. I think that's one example. I have many, but I won't go into every single example where I think we can make improvements or strides.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Rob. I think I'm 100% with you. If it's whether it's the biggest problem or one of the biggest problems, but it's definitely an absolute major issue and a concern in supply chains is to get the visibility of where things are and how things are moving, what is getting serviced, I don't know, today, looking not just retrospectively and being able to discover the issues and the magnitude, but actually try to get ahead of problems, try to anticipate, and use of that, and the visibility is an absolutely critical element of that, and that which is one of the main things that is underpinning the service model and the business model that we have here at Flox. So thanks very much. It was a fascinating discussion. Thanks very much, Rob, for joining us. And I trust our viewers have also found this conversation interesting and relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to join you and nice to chat.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.